Hey guys, this is the Google slide that we talked about during our Google Meet today. I just wanted to make a shorter video. I know sometimes if I just post the Google Meets, it's just me talking back and forth to the kids, and sometimes it might get a little confusing. So I wanted to do this video for you all really quick. That way you didn't have to try to figure out when I was teaching and then when I was just having conversations with the kids. So this is from, we talked about this on Monday. If you remember, we've been looking at this graphic for a while. So remember, this is just to explain where your genetic material is going to be found. So remember, we've got our cell and that egg-looking thing right there. That's the nucleus. And if you zoom into the nucleus, right, here we are. You zoom in some more, that's a chromosome. You zoom into your chromosome, you see that chromosome is just DNA tightly coiled. You zoom into the DNA, that's your gene, right? And genes usually have different alleles. Maybe a parent has a brown eye color allele, or another parent has a blue eye color allele. But we've been talking about this for a while, so you should be understanding this. On Monday, we briefly talked about some definitions. We talked about DNA, right? It's got 4 bases, A, T, G, and C. We talked about chromosomes. That holds all of our genetic material, right? It's made of DNA inside our nucleus of our cells. And then genes, of course, are factors in DNA that control traits. Remember, DNA makes proteins, which makes traits, your physical traits. We've talked about what a mutation is. We know that it's a different phenotype or physical trait than normal. This leads to variation, right? We want variation in populations, but mutations can also lead to genetic disorders. This was also on Monday. How do mutations occur? They can either be passed down from your parents or they can be acquired, meaning environmental problems can damage your DNA, or DNA replication can occur and something can get messed up when your DNA is replicating. And this is where we stopped on Monday. So mutations can either be helpful, harmful, or neutral. And usually it really all depends on the environment. So these mutations can't necessarily change, but a mutation can go from being helpful to being harmful depending on the environment. So we talked about this on Monday in our Google Meet, right? So this bison right here is white. It has albinism, meaning there's no pigment in its fur color. So it's completely white, but it also has a cousin who is also a white calf, and his cousin lives in the wild. So this one lives on a farm. Oh, whoops, sorry. This one lives on a farm. The other one lives in the wild. Which one has a better chance of surviving? Well, obviously, the one that's in captivity, the one that's in the farm, that's going to be, a better chance of surviving. So the one out in the wild is going to have a harmful mutation. Well, why? Wolves, coyotes, larger predators are going to go after these bison. And what's going to be easier to see? The brown bison running around or this bright white bison? So that is when it becomes a harmful mutation because it's going to hurt its chance of surviving. In the video from Monday, I showed like a little model of DNA. I made it out of licorice and little mini starbursts. But I wanted to show you on here too. This is a strand of DNA. And as you can see in the middle, these are our bases, right? A, T, C, and G. And if you're looking closely, you can see that purple always goes with green and blue always goes with pink, right? So what does that mean? What are the bases that pair up together? Well, A, adenine, pairs up with purple, right? Thymine. The pink, right, cytosine, always pairs up with the blue, guanine. And so A always goes with T, C always goes with G. And we're going to look more into that next week, so don't focus too much on the DNA right now. What I do want to talk about is mutations, right? Anytime when DNA is replicating and making a copy of itself, anytime these base pairs change, it can possibly lead to a mutation. And so let's take a look at some harmful mutations. So a harmful mutation is going to reduce the organism's chance for survival. There's tons of different harmful mutations in humans: cancer, cystic fibrosis, sickle cell disease, hemophilia, Down syndrome, right? That's where there's an extra chromosome on your chromosome 21, right? You're supposed to have two, one from your mom, one from your dad. Well, you get an extra one, and that's what causes Down syndrome. But one of the main ones I want to look at is, of course, cancer, right? This is the most common. So cancer begins when genes in a cell mutate. A mutation or a change can either create a bad protein or it can stop a protein from ever being made. This causes cells to start multiplying uncontrollably, and then they become cancerous, and then they can turn into a tumor. So there's two ways that cancer spreads. It's either acquired. That means that there's some sort of environmental problem that's causing the cells to mutate and multiply. So tobacco, right? Smoking, exposure to UV rays over a long period of time. If you're outside a lot and you don't put on sunscreen, you're taking in all those bad UV rays, and that's going to cause problems in your skin cells. They're going to start to mutate. Not always, of course, but there's a chance that they can start to mutate. And if one cell mutates and it survives, and it produces another mutated cell, and that produces another mutated cell, eventually you're going to have a tumor, you're going to have cancerous cells, and they're going to start spreading. Of course, there's always another way. You could have some mutated genes from your parents. This happens between like 5 to 20% of the time in cancers. The next one is sickle cell disease. So this is a mutation in a gene found on chromosome 11. Most of the time, your red blood cells, your red blood cells should look like this, right? They're round. It kind of looks like somebody put their thumb right in the middle of it. It's like this weird disc shape. But with sickle cell disease, they look like rods or little half moons. So this is what happens with sickle cell. This becomes a problem because these can't flow like these cells can, and so they end up causing blockages, and it can lead to anemia and all sorts of health problems. This disease is most common in African Americans, but it can also be common. I don't want to say common, but I guess more common in people that are descendants from the Mediterranean, right? Middle East, South America, and India. Well, why is that? Those places like Africa, like South America, like India, they have a high number of mosquitoes. And these mosquitoes carry a disease called malaria, right? Most of you have probably heard it. And so what happened is a long time ago, somebody had a mutation for sickle cell, right? If you have one sickle cell gene, you actually are protected from malaria. However, now the issue comes if you have two sickle cell genes, right? That's when you get the actual disease. So again, think about chromosome 11, right? You get one chromosome 11 from your mom and one chromosome 11 from your dad. So let's say your mom passed down the sickle cell gene, but your dad didn't have it, right? Well, now you're safe from malaria. But let's say your mom has the sickle cell gene and your dad has the sickle cell gene, and they both pass it down to you. Well, now instead of being protected from malaria, now you're going to end up with sickle cell disease. So this one kind of sucks. Okay. And then, of course, we have neutral mutations. These don't show any advantages or disadvantages. Sometimes you have mutated genes and you don't even know it because sometimes it won't show up as a physical trait. So it just all depends. So, of course, we've talked about this one, the blue eye mutation. Originally, all humans had brown eyes. But then, like 6,000 to 10,000 years ago, there was a mutation in just one person. And this one gene that was mutated affected the melanin produced in the eye, right? Blue eyes, it just means there's a lack of melanin, right? Everyone had brown eyes. Some people started to get blue eyes. And so Now it's more common, of course, but it is a mutation. But it really doesn't help or hurt. Scientists don't really know and haven't found if there was an actual benefit all those years ago to colored eyes. So if you have blue eyes, cool, good for you. I wish I had blue eyes. Anyways, and then there's this thing called syndactyly. It's caused by a gene mutation on your chromosome 2. And basically, it's just where sometimes your fingers or your toes are fused together. And again, it can look a little strange, I guess, but if you never got it fixed by surgery, it wouldn't really hurt you. And it doesn't really help you either. It's just, it's just a mutation, right? You could live with this and you'd be fine. And then, of course, there are beneficial mutations. This is going to help with survival, with reproduction. It's going to help you live longer. But again, remember, it really all depends on the environment. So the first one is trichromatic vision. So there's different levels of vision, right? If you're monochromatic, it's going to be black and white. We are trichromatics, and we can see the three primary colors, right? Red, yellow, and blue. And all the mixture of those three makes all the colors of the rainbow. So we can see all of those colors. Most mammals, however, are dichromatics. And the dichromats are right here, and they really only see shades of blue and yellow. So they're missing that red color that we can see. And so it's a mutation, right? That's on a chromosome 7. And out of all of the mammals on Earth, us, along with some primates, right, like chimpanzees and monkeys, and some marsupials, we're the only mammals that are able to see all three of the primary colors. Now, this one isn't necessarily a mutation. I guess it would be more of a adaptation, a genetic adaptation. But I still want to include it because I think it's really interesting. So in Peru, right? Peru is in South America. There is a city called La Rinconada, and it is 16,732 feet above sea level. If you've always lived in Kentucky, I know it's kind of hard to grasp. I think we're only a couple hundred feet above sea level. But if you've ever gone hiking in the mountains, or if you've ever been like out west to Colorado, whenever you go up in elevation, the air changes. You can definitely feel it when you're breathing. And sometimes, if you're at really high levels, lack of air at this level can lead to hypoxia. So that can be trouble breathing. It can lead to heart issues, heart problems. And if you're up there for a long period of time, it can make you really, really sick. So what happens is if you are from, a low elevation, would be called lowlanders, and you travel to a higher elevation, you start to produce more hemoglobin. Hemoglobin is in your blood, and that's what carries oxygen to your body, right? The higher you go, the less oxygen there is. So when you're traveling to higher elevation, that's when you start producing more hemoglobin. But it's just a temporary adaptation because when you leave that high elevation, your hemoglobin levels go back to normal. But the people who live in this city are actually born with super high levels of hemoglobin already. This is an adaptation, right? Not necessarily a mutation, but this is an adaptation that has been passed down from parent to offspring in this city, which helps them survive. It helps them to not get sick from that hypoxia. And so these are just some examples of some different mutations. I think probably next week we're going to start looking more at mutations, determining if they're going to be beneficial or harmful or neutral based on the environment. And we're going to look at changing some DNA bases to see what happens. So please, if you are not in our Google Meets, I always let you know if it's just kind of like, hey, stop in if you have questions, or if it's like, hey, we're going over new stuff, you need to be here. So if I'm saying, hey, this is new material, make sure you come, please try to come to the Google Meets. So I will see you guys tomorrow at 12:30.